Welcome to Agenda Alexandria. We are going to have a discussion this evening. I'm very excited and I'm glad to see all these faces in our audience about dockless mobility, also known as scooters. And I want to introduce our panelists. Sitting here to my left, your right, Jennifer Huddleston. She's a research fellow at George Mason University's Mercatus Center who has written extensively about micromobility. Native of Florence, Alabama, Huddleston lives in Fairfax City. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Wesley College in Massachusetts and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Alabama. A former core member at Teach for America, she taught elementary school art in the Mississippi Delta. Math in the Mississippi Delta before working for a higher education nonprofit and ultimately joining the Mercatus Center. On my far left, your far right, here is Hal Hardaway, a member of the Old Town Civic Association and a critic of scooters, we're going to do that in a second, who is perhaps best known as hosting tourists and pedestrians in his garage on South Union Street. Raise your hand if you've spoken to him in his garage. Okay, it's like half our audience. A native of Crewe, Virginia, Hardaway has lived in Old Town for 20 years. He has a Bachelor of Science in Physics from the College of William & Mary from Williamsburg, a Navy veteran. He specialized in cryptology before retiring as captain in 2002. To my right, your left, here's Bill Nichols, Vice President of Operations at Bolt Mobility. Now, if you look at the back here, you'll see a Bolt scooter, right? Which is one of the companies approved to have scooters in Alexandria during the 9-month pilot program. A native of Birmingham, Alabama. Native of Birmingham, Alabama, Nicholas lives in Brooklyn. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from Northwestern University. Before working at Bolt, he worked in sales and communications for Tesla. Did you bring a Tesla for us to drive too? Not today. I wish. Okay, so I'm going to ask Jennifer to start the discussion, if that's okay. So, as someone who has studied this issue, if we could just sort of lay the groundwork here for what are these things? I think a lot of people in our audience probably first saw these things maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and wondered, what the heck are these things, and why are there hundreds of them all over the streets of Alexandria? What are these things, and what are they doing here?
Well, first let me start by saying thank you so much for having me tonight, Michael, and thank you all for coming out. What's really exciting about micromobility or dockless mobility or scooters is what we're really seeing is a transportation renaissance. Things that started about 10 years or so ago with ride sharing like Uber and Lyft, and have now moved into various other transit solutions like dockless scooters, dockless bikes. We're also seeing, really exciting things with driverless cars and drones and all sorts of new technological innovation in the transportation sector. So when we're talking about these devices, we're not just talking about things like the scooter in the back, we're talking about a renaissance in how we get from point A to point B.
So you touched on something there I want to make sure is clear to our audience. Dockless bicycles. So our audience is probably familiar with the docked bicycles, which are the capital Bikeshare program. The city went through all kinds of drama to figure out where exactly they wanted those docks to be. And then all of a sudden, at some point last year, there were all these dockless bicycles. Explain the difference between the docked bicycles and the dockless mobility that we're talking about tonight.
So with docked programs, you typically would see something similar to Capital Bikeshare up here, where you have one location, you pick up a device there, whether it's a bicycle or a scooter, and you have to return it to another similar location. With the dockless mobility that we're seeing now, be it scooters or bikes or even dockless mopeds in some cities now, you pick it up in one place, you drive it where you're going, and then you leave it somewhere else, not necessarily in an assigned location.
So now, from your vantage point there on Union Street, you see a lot of this stuff, right? Okay, so explain how this actually works in real life in terms of how people use these things, how people maybe misuse them, and the reaction of the neighborhoods to them.
Well, I live on 300 block South Union Street. I watch it every day. I've seen maybe, I think the program's been in effect since December, I've seen maybe 2 stop out of hundreds of stop signs. And I'm not hard over them, so we have a problem with bicycles, cursing at us and almost hitting us. But, police cruisers don't stop at stop signs. Now, I don't really care as long as you look. The scooters don't even look. They don't wear helmets. I've almost been hit. My friends have almost been hit on the sidewalks. They ignore not only the regulations laid out in the city MOU, which is meaningless, but it's state code. I think if you look at it, I'm not an expert, not extremely corrected. What they're doing is just strictly illegal and it's dangerous.
So I think the issue with state code is that these things are supposed to be in the street, not on the sidewalk. That's the state code.
Well, yeah, that's part of it. And then, you're supposed to, they're motorized vehicles. Bicycles are considered vehicles by state code, except you can't get a driving under the influence of a bicycle. Or not the police academy, believe it or not. But they're supposed to stop. I mean, it's just the law. If they don't stop, I don't really care. They slow down and look, but they don't.
And do cars stop?
Most of them don't. I mean, most of them will slow down, but like stop. The red light was pink, say, they kind of. But at least if you look, I don't say anything. But if you blow through, and then you almost hit me in the crosswalk, and I've almost been hit by scooters. Or you give me or anybody else the finger, then I've got a problem. That's one of the reasons I'm here.
And so now we're going to move the conversation over to our captain of industry over here with Bolt Mobility. Again, there's the Bolt in the back over here. So this pilot program is really interesting because all of a sudden there's like hundreds of these. I think there's like 800 or 900 of these things that have just descended on our city. All like within a matter of a few weeks, there are more scooters in Alexandria than Bikeshare bikes. So there's this massive, sea change that's happening really quickly. And so the conventional wisdom is this is temporary because you have all of these venture capitalists who are trying to sort of get a corner of the market and make it their thing, right? And so there are 6, I think, companies, right? Bolt is one of them. From a business perspective, what is it you guys are trying to do?
Well, thank you for having me. And I am here representing Bolt and happy to be in front of the public because I understand and admit that it's a divisive topic, certainly filled with controversy. But from our vantage, it's certainly worth the experimentation, the iteration, the optimization that this pilot program will hopefully deliver to the city of Alexandria, which according to Hal seems pretty lawless right now. But it's in the hopes of this pilot program that the regulation can catch up, per se, with the technology. Because right now it's eclipsed it. And that's the case with most technological progressions. And so we're at a cross-section where people of all ages, of all backgrounds, interests, are starting to regress from the suburbs that were populated in the 60s, 70s, and 80s back to urban centers. And individual car ownership is not nearly as compelling as it once was. And it's certainly not affordable or even possible with the limited amount of space that many more people are occupying right now. So scooters or dockless bikes or many other shared forms of transportation are a solution that are reaching many different demographics where the city couldn't provide. I mean, there's not enough tax revenue in most American cities, and I'm not here, working with the finance department to tell you whether they could develop a new light rail system or new bus lines. But entering a private partnership where the burden is carried by Silicon Valley and by a Miami Beach-based company, in my case, to participate in a program where we can hopefully provide a thoughtful, responsible option for people who need it, for people who can't afford or can't be convenienced with their own car. They're not able to take public transportation, and ride sharing, Lyft and Uber isn't a possibility for them for whatever reason. So, I'd like to end the answer to this first question in that we certainly agree that in the situation that Alexandria may be experiencing right now is imperfect, but it certainly has a lot of potential. And Bolt's here in this forum, in many others, providing feedback to the city to make sure that some light regulation will make it so that these scooters aren't just parked everywhere and aren't solely used by young people carelessly after gallivanting at the bars, but being used by folks who need to get to work, who need to get to school, who want to run their errands and want to do so conveniently, affordably, and and at their own desires, at their own time.
Just one thing I want to follow up on, which is that the use has already outpaced the regulation, right? So, like, what regulation is needed to catch up with the use?
So Bolt was admittedly 8 months late to what is a pretty infantile market, and I think a lot of people were introduced to scooters by a few of our competitors who dropped scooters on the streets, and before there were any kind of decision by public officials to say whether they were legal, whether they were not, whether they could ride here, there, park, anywhere.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I put a pause?
Yeah.
So in Virginia, that would be Arlington, right? They sort of showed up in Arlington. Do I have that right? Jennifer, like
So by and large, I think so. I'm not entirely sure if that was the first place they just showed up, but I do know they were in Arlington before Alexandria.
I didn't interrupt you, but so like you had mentioned that the use actually had outpaced the regulation. What regulation is needed?
I think, I think Hal was mentioning, or maybe his colleague Michael, that if it seems preposterous to allow a car to park anywhere it would want. And that seems very reasonable to me, and growing up in the age of cars. But I'm sure that there was a time in their introduction where there wasn't as many parking spots, as many rules as to where to put them as there are today. And so I think light regulation, which would prescribe where, when, and how these are ridden and parked, would be beneficial to the people that ride them, and the other people that we consider our customers as well. Anyone who is using the right of way on a sidewalk or on a public road. Just because our customers prefer to take a scooter doesn't mean that it needs to come at the detriment of someone else who's walking down the sidewalk or bicycling down the road.
So I want to actually, at this point, pause just for a little bit for our audience to say that we want your questions. So at your table, there should be here we go. Frank is waving around post-it notes there on your table. We want your questions. Please write them down. We're going to have board members circulating around the audience. They're going to bring them to me. I'm going to ask all the questions. So you mentioned something just then, Will, which is kind of controversial, which is, should there be places to park these things? I mean, the beauty of dockless mobility is its docklessness. Yes, docklessness. You can park them anywhere. And so if the city council creates a corral for these things, they're no longer actually dockless, right? Jennifer, what's been the experience of other localities creating corrals or places where you should park these things?
So we've seen various cities take very different approaches when it comes to the scooters, and one thing that some cities have done, both Memphis, Tennessee was one of the first movers to do this, and now parts of Arlington have done it as well, is to designate a particular parking place as kind of a scooter corral of some kind, or a dockless mobility corral, because it's not just the scooters in a lot of these cities. They aren't mandating that they be parked there, but they're incentivizing users to park them there to kind of solve some of these problems with sidewalk congestion, particularly in, say, an area with narrow sidewalks. At the same time, we've also seen that different companies are taking different actions to incentivize better parking behavior. A lot of the companies now will require that riders take a picture of how it's parked to make sure that it's not, say, blocking an entrance or over on its side. And then they're able to kind of either provide a reward for riders that are doing a good job of, doing the proper behavior, or provide penalties for riders that are not. Now, of course, this isn't a perfect system, and unfortunately, some people aren't aware of the issues it can cause and may be making poor choices. But there is kind of a growing education of both riders and of communities to try and help solve this problem in a way that allows the most people to still access the right of way and to enjoy these new devices.
On the issue of people making poor choices, how explain people making poor choices? And you have witnessed this firsthand, and I know you had a series of photographs, right? So we're not going to get into the photographs, but if we were to have the PowerPoint presentation, which we're going to spare you, what would we see?
Well, I spoke to some before. You see people on the stop signs, you see people in public parks, a lot of kids, industrial walkways. You see them on King Street, you see them on Union Street. I'm sure you see them elsewhere. You see them underway, but you see them parked, you see them laying on the sidewalks, blocking pedestrian thoroughfare. I have elderly friends who have almost been hit and can't get around. And one of them had them piled up in front of the condo block, laying on the street in a pile on the sidewalk. And in her 80s, she couldn't move it, you know. So I mean, that's a real problem. But on decisions, that's the micro level. Let me address that real quickly, the macro level. And I'm all for free enterprise and free markets. And I was talking to Jennifer earlier. I love transportation. The railroad built my hometown in 1888. And oh, by the way, a quickie, as a native Virginian, they're advertised Alabamians with their family roots are in Virginia. And I didn't witness it. I didn't go to council there. I'm told that the council had a decision whether just to not do it at all or have a pilot program. They elected to have a pilot program. And I think, I won't say that's a poor decision, but it's governed by an MOU I mentioned before, which is not enforced, it's unenforced. And I could talk forever about this now, but how do you enforce it? We were told that the scooter companies are going to enforce it. They can't enforce it. And then we were told the police department's going to enforce it. They can't do it on enough resources. They're not heard TNES, and they can't do it. So to me, it's all an impossibility.
Well, actually, if I could sort of piggyback on that a little bit, which is I had a conversation today with Jan Langberg, who is the head of Transportation Environmental Services, the city agency that's in charge of enforcement of this. And his perspective is it's really not the city's duty to enforce it; it's these guys, right? Like Bulbs of the world, and all of his competitors. And so what happens is you've got these teams of people on King Street. There are 4 full-time people that spend 17 hours a day roaming up and down King Street and a 2-block radius, that would be Cannon Street and Queen Street, looking for these things in the right-of-way, blocking the sidewalks. And then they call the companies and say, look, you've got 2 hours to move this or else we will impound it. And so apparently within the past week, this team, the King Street team, has made 3 phone calls about scooters that are in the wrong places, and in 2 of those cases, the companies have come out and moved them. In one case, the company never responded to their call, never moved the scooter, and so the Alexandria city government impounded the scooter. It was not a vote. No. It was, in fact, interestingly enough, it was one of the companies that's not even in Alexandria. It was Spin scooter that has been impounded. So that's not one of the companies in Alexandria, but apparently Spin never responded to the city government, and it's even today, at this hour, in the city impound lot, the Spin scooter. So Jennifer said something I'd like you to explain, which is when you're, a lot of times on these things, when you're done riding, the app makes you take a photo of where you have parked it in order to end your ride. This is very important because you will be continually charged until you take the photograph that allows you to end the ride. Raise your hand if you have taken a scooter. Ever been on a scooter, have done one of these things? Okay, raise your hand if you have never taken a scooter and have no experience with this technology. All right. A lot of potential customers. So explain the actual process of taking a ride. I actually only took a ride on one of these things relatively recently, and my sort of first stumbling block is how do I even know where these things are, right? So like the Capital Bikeshare, I know that I go to the Capital Bikeshare station, and that's where I can find one. But with these things, I don't know where they are, right? So like explain the process of how do you find one and how do you use it, and then this part about taking a photo.
Indeed. So our riders download our app in the App Store or the Google Play Store, and they download some very basic information off of your driver's license. We do require that you certify that you're 18 years of age. You do upload a credit card, and then you are able to essentially see in a map view where all of our scooters are, what state of charge they have, and there's kind of unique identification numbers, we call QR codes, that you can then find the scooter. When you approach it, you use your phone's camera to scan that code, and it essentially unlocks. Something that safety is a huge concern of ours. That's why our scooters are painted yellow. It's the first color that our eyes see in the color spectrum. We actually do have a unique feature. We're the only scooter company that makes people test the brake before they're allowed to accelerate on the scooter. We have a unique kind of foot platform, and we try and describe kind of the features of the scooter as people download the app, so they're most familiar not only with the best ways to ride them, but also the local rules within the local ordinance and the MOU. And once you do ride the scooter to where you're going, we ask that many times before you lock it, we ask that it's not blocking the right of way, it's not in a handicap parking spot or in front of a store, and we do ask that you take a photograph for two purposes. We kind of have carrot and stick approaches to this, where we're still optimizing, but we want to reward the folks who park them appropriately and responsibly, and ultimately want to penalize or fine the folks that don't, because they're not contributing to the space at large, and they're certainly not being a good patron of ours. So those are things. That's kind of the basic.
I want to follow up on this issue of the photographs, because I'm wondering, so when you are done when you're done with your scooter ride and you want to end it and have the app stop charging, which is very important, right? So you're done, and please don't take any more money out of my wallet. You have to take, for most of these apps, I think, maybe if not all, you have to take a photo of where you park. This is what he's talking about. My question is there a live person looking at these photos, or is this some sort of AI that's looking at them?
So it's probably different for each company. We are a smaller company compared to others that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, have been valuated at billions. But we actually do have a 24/7 customer service team that sits down in Florida. And one thing that's also very unique about Bolt is that we do have a full-time W-2 workforce that works around the clock, that we provide competitive hourly wages, we provide them access to benefits, career opportunities, so on and so forth. One of our employees, Chris, is here tonight. And so the idea is when we do receive feedback, either from our app or from other folks within the city that say, hey, the scooter's in front of my house, or it's on my lawn, it's blocking my parking spot, we actually have a team that we can deploy at all hours of the day. And this may seem like what you would do if you ran your own business. You have to employ people to help you run it. But one of the unique features about this industry is that most of the scooter vendors actually crowdsource what many call the gig economy. So they don't actually have any employees of their own. They just have folks that download their app, and there's essentially a bounty connected to each scooter. So if one scooter is low on charge, then someone who might drive an Uber during the day, or might be a waitress or a bar back, trying to earn
Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
The bounty hunter.
Trying to earn some extra cash.
You know what? Actually, so earlier this evening, there was a scooter. It was not a Bolt, I don't think, but before I even got here, there was a scooter. Someone brought a scooter to our location here, and one of these people who are roaming around looking for money came and grabbed it up. Jennifer, explain that part of the business here, because I think this is part of this that's, I think, really kind of a new way of looking at this. The gig economy / disruptive economy nature of this, where these people that are roaming around, they don't work for Bolt, they don't work for Lyft, they're sort of independent contractors. I would imagine in many cases probably try to get income from multiple ones of these companies. In the same way that you have many of those drivers that drive around in Uber, they also drive for Lyft, right? So explain this part of what we're talking about.
So with a lot of the scooters, because they are dockless and so they are ending up in different places, people will sign up to be a charger, and then they will go out at night or at a certain time and hunt down the scooters and take them home and charge them in exchange for a certain fee, depending on, it varies from company to company how the fee's calculated and things like that. But it's another opportunity for people that may be looking for a way to earn a little bit of extra income, or even just, I've heard that amongst some teenagers and some young adults, it's considered almost like a scavenger hunt. It's a way, but it's also a way to help get the scooters out of maybe an area that they wouldn't be ridden as much and into an area where they'll be more used the next morning, and also to help solve some of the problems with where the scooters overnight.
Now, Hal, has this been an issue? I know that I've seen on my neighborhood listserv / next door that the people that drive around grabbing these things up and putting them in vans and perhaps even parking their van in a spot for a certain period of time. This has caused some consternation among neighborhood residents, right?
Yes, it has. And I've talked to some of the people in the vans and also Bikeshare vans, which I've got to wonder, usually the vans run a lot of gas. And I'm not against that, but I am on the environmental council in Alexandria. So I'm a little bit interested in that. The vans picking them up haven't been that much of a problem. I'm fascinated with the business model. I've read something about it just a little bit. Maybe they can educate me more on how this all works and people recharge them. And I'm curious, you know, what the life cycle of the scooter, I don't know on that is, you know, what profit you make in the end when they wear out or whatever happens after you pay the people to recharge them. But you know, picking them up hasn't been a problem in the neighborhood. Let me get off topic just real quick. I wanted to say something about you should talk about Jan Land. I haven't talked to Jan, but it's an overarching thing to me. Some of you may know that Jan says it's not up to the city to enforce it. Well, yes, it is. The city adopted it. I pay taxes on chain of commands, not to either of them. They're doing what I would do if I had their jobs. I'm my chain of commands to the city, and that's what I pay taxes to. So yes, the city is responsible.
Well, John's not here to defend himself. I was trying to characterize my conversation with John earlier today. His point was he doesn't want the city to spend all its time and effort and resources enforcing it. What he wants to do is, if there's a problem, call up Bolt and have Bolt take care of it. You see what I'm saying? So, like,
Yeah.
So, and if they don't act within 2 hours, they will impound it. And there's an example of that right now.
Yeah, and I don't want John's people, TDS, or the police having to do this. They've got enough to do already. As a taxpayer, they have their salaries. So that's a whole, I could go, I'll stop there. I think I can talk afterwards about that, and I'll do it.
All right. So, question from the audience about what is the cost of doing these things? I'll start with you, Jennifer, and maybe go over to Paul. How much do these things actually cost to do this? Does it vary in place to place? Is it like standard cost?
So again, as a scholar, I look at the bigger picture, and and what it is it's providing by and large, a low-cost form of transportation that solves this last mile problem. But we've seen various other options. I'm sure that Will can speak to the specifics of their costs as a company.
Yeah, I mean, what I meant by cost is how much does it actually cost to ride them? From a driver's perspective, if you want to get on this thing and take it half a mile, how much does that cost?
It's free to download the app. It's a $5 security deposit, which is returned to your credit card within 5 days. It's $1 to rent and 15 cents a minute. So to give you some averages based on this market, the average price of a ride is just underneath $4. We do anywhere from like 6,000 to 7,000 rides a month, or at least we did last month. Just over 9,000 miles were traveled on a scooter, which, to your point, Hal, that's a lot of miles that would have typically been burned by gasoline-powered cars, which contributes over 34% of carbon emissions into our atmosphere, at least in this country.
Actually, I want to piggyback on that. So when, I can't remember which of the apps it is, but when you're done with one of the scooters, it says, there was some message that popped up that was like, this was a carbon-free ride, which is technically true in the sense that, like, that scooter ride did not eat up any carbon. But Hal has a point where you got these vans driving around, and so, like, what's the bigger picture here in terms of, is this an environmentally friendly way to get around?
So what we're looking at is a change in kind of the different ways we get from point A to point B, and I'm not exactly sure of the kind of different, once you factor in the van and everything, but we're also seeing a change in developing an ecosystem of transportation. So people might have taken that car 1 mile or 2 miles, but now they're going to take a scooter to a different transportation option, or they're going to share a ride with someone, be it via ride share or even carpooling, so that they can take 66 at rush hour when it's such a mess. So what we're really looking at is, how are our cities and our transportation in general changing to solve a lot of these problems, whether it's environmental problems or congestion problems.
So a question from the audience about this person who wrote the question sees these things on paved trails in city parks, which the question writer assumes is illegal and unsafe. What are you going to do about this? So I'm curious about, like, what is the you? How, like, who? So think about drivers of cars. When drivers of cars are doing illegal things, it's not Ford who comes around and polices it, right? I mean, it's not like it's not Chevy who comes around and enforces it. It's the Alexandria Police Department. Should they play a role here?
Yeah, absolutely, and I don't hesitate to call 703-746-4444. And I hope you do too when you see the violations. I call them other things, cars and everything else. And I can't understand, you know, anything I say, I can change my mind and I'll even prove I'm wrong. I don't understand how it can be enforced. When we're told that the scooter companies, they can't enforce it. I think I said before, the police department, TAS can. So why think about it, you know, and you come up with a reason how they can, all this can be enforced, but please let me know.
Well, and on that note, I don't have a solution for how it can be enforced, but I think this is part of the reason that education is so key, so that if you are riding a scooter, if you're someone who's taking these new forms of transportation, that you are aware of local laws and local regulations and you're following them the same way you would be if you went to a new town looking for local regulations about where you can take your car or your bicycle, and being aware of those best practices as well.
Well, on that issue, so the question writer here talks about the paved trails in city parks as being illegal and unsafe for the scooter riders. I'm not sure that's the case really in all of these situations, and let me say why. Because I believe it's only really illegal on the George Washington Trail, right? So that's national sort of thing. If you're talking about bike lanes, that's where you're supposed to ride these things, right? Like, so when in terms of trails, a lot of trails are bike lanes, right? So it's entirely appropriate to, isn't it, to ride these things in a bike lane? If you're talking about a bike lane, that's where they should be, right?
Most cities, that's where they have found is the safest place, both for the scooter riders and the bicycle riders, and kind of this shared space as well. But even in that case, it's important that people are aware that the scooters are in the area. Just as when you're driving a car, it often takes some getting used to when a new bike lane's in town, making sure that drivers and riders are both aware that this is shared space to try and keep everyone safe.
So there's high-tech and low-tech solutions to this. If the city were to ordain that public parks were not an appropriate place for scooters to ride, we would certainly appreciate signage to let our riders know. But a high-tech solution that we employ in many cities, Alexandria included, is that we can create what we call a geofence. So when a scooter enters one of these public parks, it automatically slows down safely. They get a push notification on their phone, and soon our scooters will actually have touch screens, and so you'll be able to view the message on the scooter itself, but it'll inform the rider that they need to either return to the service area before they can lock the scooter. The incentive is if they can't lock it, they have to continue to pay for it, but until they get it back into that service area, they won't be able to ride it, at least redeem some portion of the product.
This question from the audience: what is the financial benefit to the city? These things are taking up space on the city streets, and like, does the city have an actual financial interest in allowing this stuff to happen? Or like, alternatively, what if the city just said, no, we're not going to do this? Is there repercussions?
We have seen cities that have banned them or placed very strict limits on them, and that is a choice that some cities choose to make. But I think one of the interesting questions is, what signal does that send to people who may be looking at developing city-specific solutions to each individual city's transportation problem? I know we were discussing earlier at the table before dinner how if you go around the world and you go around even the same parts of, say, Alexandria, you may see different transportation options and different solutions that would be appropriate. And particularly with some of our high schoolers here tonight running the tech and the AV for this panel, you know, one of them may come up with a really creative entrepreneurial idea to solve a transportation problem in their neighborhood. And I think we want to make sure that cities are encouraging that kind of entrepreneurial and creative thinking when it comes to transportation problems, so that we can have 21st century solutions to these problems.
So, question from the audience. We need more regulation, rules, and enforcement, but enforcement is a cost to the city, right? So, you mentioned earlier regulation. The regulation hasn't caught up. What would you like to see the city do in terms of catching up? Or should the city do anything?
I'm trying to take my hands great here, but we're a Miami-based company. I think Miami's actually taking a really capitalistic approach to this. So they have employed a small team. It's a division of their parking authority, so it's people that they already had employed on their staff. And instead of going around trying to ticket cars and tow cars, which I also think is of value, they certainly take up more space and are harder to move. But for scooters that they find that are misplaced or carelessly parked, they have the right through their ordinance to pick up that scooter and impound it. It's a $25 impound fee that the scooter operator incurs. They provide us the right to pass along that fee to the last person who rode it. But within the ordinance, they dedicate all of those funds in sort of a black box that go to the creation of bike lanes, parking corrals, general sidewalk maintenance and improvement. So I think, what does it cost the city? There's certainly an opportunity cost, as Jennifer described, but there are fee-based mechanisms that can kind of create funding for the city for certain projects that they would see fit to use.
Question from the audience: what did the city get in terms of payment from Bolt? I think there was two things, right? There was the permit fee, and then there was like a bond. So it's $5,000 each. So I think you guys gave $10,000 to the city. Does that sound right?
Plus some other fees, closer in between $10,000 and $15,000 per operator to participate in this 9-month pilot program.
And is that your experience in other cities? Is that higher or lower? Like, how does that?
It's probably middle of the road. And there are some cities that are very excited about embracing this technology. There certainly are others that have been a bit more pensive and trepidatious about embracing this, but we have seen kind of a fee-based model, whether it be per application or per scooter that's in use, as kind of a prerequisite to operate.
Two questions I'm going to combine, which are about usage, which I'm going to throw over to Hal, which is, how do you see people using them? Question about, can you go to the store and pick items up? Do you see people riding around with stuff that they've gotten from, like, let's say Saturday at the Market Square, and like they're trying to scooter home with a bag full of bagels or something like that? And the other one had to do with more than one person riding them. How often do you see more than one person riding these things?
Okay, and if I forget about answering the second question, let me know. I've never seen anybody carrying any goods on a scooter. I ride my bicycle over to the Safeway to get, I used to get a six-pack of beer, but when I hang it on the handlebar, it's dangerous on the bicycle, and I suspect it would be the same thing with the scooter when the grips are that close together. On the what was it, young people riding?
Well, more than one person.
More
so
than one
not
person.
necessarily. You see this a lot with young people, but I've seen adults do this too. Where you have more than.
I've seen the total gamut of possibilities of young and old and male and female riding. About 2 Saturday nights ago, I go out to my garage, which is on Union Street. I opened the door. I went to get something that I needed briefly, and here comes a scooter down at 9 o'clock, after 9 o'clock at night, with a guy on it, and he's got, I would estimate, I don't have kids, a 2-year-old on the shoulder. And I watch when he goes to the south and he crosses Wolf Street. We all got four-way stop sign. Once again, he ran the stop sign. He didn't even look. I see him going up King Street. I see him in Waterfront Park. And, it's pretty, I think it's pretty bad. I mean, go look for I can see me afterwards. I'll send you some of the videos and stills.
So clearly this is disconcerting to people, and you might not like scooters as a result of this. However, you see people riding automobiles inappropriately all the time, right? And no one is calling for an abolition of automobiles, right? So, what's the solution for this?
I just see automobiles riding how? I missed the word.
So, you see people riding scooters inappropriately,
okay,
and you gave several examples.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just sort of curious about how evenly you want to apply that, because you see people riding automobiles inappropriately all the time, and I don't think anyone in our audience would call for an abolition of the automobile. So what's the solution to people using these scooters inappropriately?
Well, right. Well, automobiles, bicycles, pedestrians, it's nuts down at the intersection of King on Union. They're the worst offenders. and we just had scooters at it, I avoid it. I cannot process 4 stop signs with cars, people, scooters, and bicycles. I think it's dangerous. So yes, yeah, I mean, the law ought to apply uniformly to everybody. I think the scooters are a particular challenge, and I think bicycles are a challenge. And I ride one, and I live in Old Town. I own my own bicycle. And I don't want to get off subject here. I'm not for bike lanes, and this is just my thing. The Navy, we had a saying, the law of gross tonnage. Somebody doesn't follow the rules of the road, the maritime rules of the road, like red right returning, and they get hit by a bigger ship, guess who loses? It's common sense and personal responsibility. And when I ride my bike, I stay to the very right. And so why do we need pictures of bicycles and stuff in a lane? I just don't know. That's a whole other issue. I'll shut up.
Well, actually, on that issue, I want to circle back around and give a brief commercial for at your table, you'll find a ballot for potential topics for our next season. You'll notice on the backside, well, one of the potential topics is bike lanes. So I know that they're very controversial right now because of what the city is thinking about doing on Seminary Road. So just to circle back around to the ballot on your table, please vote for what you want to see in the upcoming season and give what any ideas that you might have about potential topics. One of our question writers suggests something that's, I think, kind of interesting as potentially one of the causes of things that people are upset about is the scattered nature of these things. You see them lying around and they're not upright. This question writer suggests that might be because of what this person calls the low quality kickstand. What's up with these kickstands? They seem kind of flimsy, aren't they?
It's, well, I can't comment for all the devices out there, but at Bolt, we sure do want to make certain that the quality of our products is such that people are encouraged to ride them. And so the scooter that you see behind us is, I think, is compelling in a lot of ways. It has a longer lasting battery, it has interesting footrests, but we actually have 2 designs that are coming out next month. One of them has a space for Hal's 6-pack.
Is that the Bolt Chariot?
Yeah, so our Bolt Chariot and our Bolt One are certainly much more robust products. And so they have aluminum frames, much more durable parts, including dual brakes, dual suspension, brighter LED lights, larger 10-inch wheels, more significant kickstands. Because I do, the purpose of the kickstand is to make sure that it's upright. So we're doing our best at Bolt, but I think it's feedback well put.
Jennifer, a couple questions here about liability and insurance. So what if these things hit a window or a business or even a person? How does liability, who's legally responsible for any of this stuff?
I think that's something that we're just starting to see now work out. And, whenever there's a new technology, that's one of the questions that inevitably has to be worked out, be it by the courts or by some form of regulation. But by and large, the courts are able to handle those type of concerns, and it would probably depend. I'm going to give the I'm trained as a lawyer answer of it depends. Because a lot of times it depends on the very specific facts of the case of whether or not a device was malfunctioning or whether someone was breaking one of those rules of the road and riding inappropriately or whether or not, it would be very specific depending on the situation. And the good news is that by and large, I think a lot of these problems have been worked out earlier than by the time we've gotten to the point of a potential lawsuit.
So Hal, one of our question writers say some of these companies have 4 requirements. Don't ride on the sidewalk. You have to be 18 to ride the thing. You have to ride it. You have to wear a helmet, and you have to park the thing responsibly. The question writer says, does anybody actually follow these rules? From your perspective of seeing this, there's got to be some people that wear helmets, right? I mean, this is not a 100% scofflaw group of people we're talking about here, right?
I've seen 1 or 2 and since December when it started. And then I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of scooters. And that's my observation. It's not.
So in terms of don't ride them on the sidewalk. You live on a street that does not have a bike lane, right? So they would have to be in the street, right? So how often do you see them in the street versus the sidewalk?
They're mostly in the street, maybe 15, 20% of the time they're on the sidewalk. That's not empirical. That's just me going out every hour because I walk every hour. But it's mostly. But the sidewalks are a problem because the sidewalks are crowded. And let me throw this in real quick. Because we get accused of being these privileged old town NIMBYs. Of all the places to have them, the little microclimate I live in of Old Town, where all the tourists come and we seem to bear the brunt of everything. And I don't know if I've ever seen a person commuting to work. Now, I'm sure there were some, but from the age and the behavior, it's like become a playground, and it's also a neighborhood which the city hall seems to forget. I love it. One reason I live there because we have businesses and it's a buzz going on. Because I lived in central London, I lived in the Tokyo suburbs. I've seen some of this, and that's why I live there. But things like this is like the worst place to have them, in my opinion. And as Jennifer says, it's different all over the city, depending on the neighborhood. It's different in Arlington, at different neighborhoods, but they move, you know. So how do you, once again, I get back, how do you enforce it and how do you monitor it?
Well, you say you haven't seen anyone use them to commute to get to work, but like that might be more of that people might be using them to be part of their commute. And let me explain what I'm saying. So what if you're in DC and you're coming to Alexandria and you get off at the King Street Metro, but that's not your final destination. It's not the King Street Metro. It might be the waterfront or City Hall. So you might take it, from the King Street Metro to City Hall. So that's not you're not using it for your commute in terms of the totality of your commute, but you're using it for what Jennifer's people that her business call the last mile, right? I mean, like, this is a really important part, is like getting to your final destination.
Yeah, well, and I didn't say that people don't use it. I just don't know. I just look at them and the behavior. I'm sure some of the people I've seen do use it, to commute to work, maybe, and maybe to do what
part of the commute, not necessarily part of the commute, not necessarily
part
the
of the commute.
totality.
No, I understand that, having lived in some of the places I've lived. But we've got a free trolley that runs after 10, and I'm over 70 years old, and I live there because I walk. I'll easily, if the free trolley's not running, walk to the King Street Metro. And I looked at something from the city that the average ride, correct me if I'm wrong, is 0.6 to 1.6 miles. My God, that's an easy walk. So why don't people walk it? And a whole nother issue, the walkability index, which is a whole nother issue, and I'll put it for a future topic maybe. Parking, we were given all kind of parking regulations, and I love waivers because of the walkability index, and now you can't walk down the street because scooters are laying in the sidewalk. So there you have it.
And when it comes to the commuting element, I think that goes to something I was mentioning earlier about we've kind of seen this change from you either bike all the way or you metro all the way or you walk all the way to the growing development of kind of a transportation as an ecosystem approach. So maybe you do take the scooter for that 1.6 miles to the metro, and then you take the metro into the office, and then you, on the way back, stop by somewhere else, or you take a ride with a friend, or whatever solution works best for you. And like we were discussing earlier too, in different parts of town, that 0.6 miles or that 1.6 miles can be different depending on sidewalk accessibility and different other elements. So each town and each location is unique, and so we've seen cities come up with a lot of different solutions. And as a scholar, it's been interesting to see how those solutions both reflect what already exists in the city, as well as kind of where the city may even see itself going in the future with transportation.
Well, actually, a question on that, which is, where have these dockless bikes and scooters worked best, and why? So you kind of touched on it in your last answer, but like, what has been the different experience, and maybe extremes, like who has had the best experience and who's had the worst experience?
So we've seen a lot of different options and a lot of different solutions from cities that, when they were dropped off without any sort of pilot program, impounded all the scooters, took them to City Hall, and then wouldn't let them come back to the city, or made them go through quite a significant number of regulatory hoops. And
which city was that?
Nashville. Then what was interesting is when Nashville did that to the initial scooters that were deployed, and Nashville does have scooters now, they've worked out a pilot program, but it took them a while. Memphis, which is a rather similar sized city in Tennessee and a rather similar, in a lot of ways to Nashville, actually basically said, we want these here. We recognize that we have some transportation needs. We would like to invite the companies to come in and work with them to develop a pilot program, because we think these may be a solution. I think they were one of the first cities to really deploy kind of the scooter corrals. They really embraced them as a city and made sure they were deployed in areas that were traditionally having problems with transportation issues, and even if they were short distances. So those are kind of probably the two go-to examples of kind of both extremes.
Question for Will. So isn't asking scooter companies to be the enforcer kind of like asking Boeing to be the inspector of the airplanes, right? I mean, is that like, what is the role of your company and other companies? What should the role be in enforcing any of this stuff that we're talking about?
I mean, we're certainly a participant. We have, like I said earlier, we have a full-time staff, about 16 people here in Alexandria that try and take care of our fleet. We also coach them on how to be ambassadors of the brand and our mission to educate folks about the scooter industry at large. But we don't, send them out with handcuffs and, bobby sticks. But there's some things that we want to, to Al's point, we give out helmets at no cost. You can request one through our app. We have a really interesting program which we have not yet launched in Alexandria, but we approach businesses and ask if they'd like to store our helmets, 5 to 10 at a time. And when someone wants to request one, we're trying to kind of improve the economics for the downtown areas that see the scooters the most. That someone would come in, request their helmet, hopefully buy a cup of coffee or sit and have lunch. So I think that we're trying to do everything we can to encourage positive use. And that goes back to kind of that carrot and stick approach. But as you were pointing out, Jennifer was describing, there have been some cities who I think have gotten really thoughtful and creative about adopting these devices. I would probably add Portland, San Francisco to that list as well. And I hate to say some of these things take time, but I think that the trend is moving in the right direction. I think that if cities can moderate a certain number of operators or a certain number of scooters based on the demand that they see, I think generally there's a positive progression that will take place. For instance, in Portland and in Miami, they started each vendor out with a certain number of scooters. So each vendor that was approved based on the minimum requirements, in Miami, for example, could place 100 scooters into its rotation. And then so long as you achieve more than, I think it's 3.5 rides per scooter per day, which means that we're meeting or exceeding demand, we can increase our fleet by 25%. And then at the point when we can't reach that metric, we either have to pause or reduce our fleet. I think that's an interesting approach to make sure that you just don't have hundreds or thousands of scooters that aren't being used, that are just littering your sidewalks. And we don't think that's not good for our business, just having a bunch of scooters that aren't making money, just blocking people's right of way. So there is a balance, and we'd like to participate in that balance. I'm not sure if we want to be the arbiter of it, so to speak.
I would also, it's easy when we're talking about dockless mobility or micromobility or any of these things to focus just on the scooters because they're what's here now. But as I mentioned earlier, each city may have a different solution, and there may be some cities that a different micromobility solution is what takes off, something that we can't even think of yet, that someone thinks really creatively, and we've seen things in the works that like little mini dockless electric cars that may be a solution in some places, or the electric bicycles may be a better solution in some places. So we shouldn't just think about the future of transportation and the future of micromobility as the scooters because they're what's here. We should also think more broadly about how are we going to see this kind of shared space and transportation evolve.
So a lot of these questions are not happy about the overall look and feel of these things. They look trashy. They're not appropriate for the historic district. They look like clutter. What of your neighbors, Hal? Like, is Is that the sort of general consensus, is that these are trashy and not befitting of the historic area?
Yes, I'd say so by lots and lots of my neighbors. And believe it or not, and I love the historic area. We're the third oldest historic district in the United States. And some of you know I'm really interested in history here late in life. But, you know, that doesn't bother me that much. I was going to say earlier, I like technology and the scooters, the energy density in the batteries, the GPS, the small motors. I like that. But that doesn't mean I like scooters in Old Town or anywhere else. But I hear a lot about how they're really messing up the feel of Old Town.
Yeah, I was on a panel discussion recently with the publisher of the Alexandria Times, and she was taking that position that, I mean, we've got this historic city, we've invested in being a historic city, and she just didn't like the way they looked. And I guess there's no way of going around that. But you could also make the same argument about electric lines and cars and all the things that come along with modern life, right? So, we live in a historic city, but there's other things that go on here. I guess the real question is, like, how do you balance that? Jennifer, have there been other historic cities? I mean, do you see these in, like, Charleston? They're in Paris, right? That's a historic city. Like, they're all over Paris.
I'm not aware of a historic district that specifically addressed that issue, but if it's something that's of interest, I'm happy to follow up with you later, Michael.
Let me see here. How long are these trips? I think you might have touched on this a little bit. From what I've read, it's sort of, at least in the city's numbers, the numbers the city has collected, it's like between half a mile and a mile, right? Does that make sense?
I think our average trip in Alexandria is around a mile. Typically about 14 minutes as our average ride.
And do you see in other, how many cities are you guys in?
We're in 8 as of last week as we launched.
Do you see them as being around the same metric in all these cities, or are they longer in some cities and shorter in others?
No, this is actually, scooters are ridden shorter here. I think it's just maybe because of the size of Alexandria and because of the multimodal access to buses and trains. In larger cities like Atlanta, in Nashville, we see people riding on 22 to 24 minutes per ride on average. In highly touristed towns like Fort Lauderdale, we see longer rides as well. But I don't think that it's necessarily a poor metric that rides are shorter here. I think that there's other options and things are denser here.
So from the audience, not necessarily a question, more of a comment. When I drive to work, I don't park in your driveway at your front door. So lots of concern about where to park these things, right? So how do you get your users, or is there a way to get your users to park them in what could be collectively assumed as an appropriate space?
Well, I think that goes back to kind of the Boeing question. We're doing our best through in-app education, through incentives and penalties, but I think because they are so new and because there are enough demonstrations of poor behavior, there's a certain kind of apathy to take responsibility. It's not the way I was brought up, it's not the way I park my scooter, but it's certainly something we're trying to encourage. But I will say in some of the other cities that, and I apologize, I live in Brooklyn, walk all over the place. But driving around today, I didn't see total errant use of our scooters, but I understand that in certain parts of the city, at least for this audience, that it is of concern. We would appreciate and certainly work with the city if they wanted to designate certain areas that we would geofence off where people could not park. And we do that actually. We have a website, micromobility.com. We have a 24/7 customer service hotline. All that information is actually located on each one of our scooters. If a concerned citizen contacted our customer service group, we'd be happy to draw you a geofence.
How would they do that?
I think it's support@boltoffice.com, and I'm not super familiar with the toll-free number, but it's on that scooter, and I can advertise it to this group afterwards. But we'll be happy to create the geofences within the app so our users would recognize that your private property is not a welcome place to leave their scooter, certainly on your driveway.
I'm curious about how narrow you can make that geofencing, because like the sidewalk, there might be a public part of the sidewalk, and then there might be sort of, as you get closer to the house, a part that might be perceived as more private, even if it's part of the public. I mean, like in Old Town, the sidewalks are. So like, how narrow can you get the geofencing?
It's a good point. Depending on the cell phone towers within any given city, it's about 15 to 25 feet, which I know seems like a large gap, especially when you're talking about a tight sidewalk or a narrow townhome, etc. But we can draw it as best we can and hope to inform people that is not a welcome place to live.
All right, Jennifer, this question's for you. It has to do with maximum speed. So I happened to have met Jennifer at an event in DC, and she was explaining some of this stuff to me with the speed, which I was sort of curious about. The very first time that I got on one of these things, it was a Bolt, and my first impression was, this thing should go faster. Why can't I get this thing to go faster? So there are like artificial speed limits that are built into these machines, right? Explain how that works.
So it varies from city to city and company to company, but one of the reactions we've seen a lot of cities have in terms of regulations is to cap the speeds at 10 miles an hour or 15 miles an hour, when I think some of the devices can go up to more in the 15 to 20 range. What's interesting about this is a lot of times it's designed to make the devices safer, but if you're riding in a bike lane, at times there can be concerns of, does it really do that? So if your scooter isn't able to go as fast as the bikes, then you could possibly be creating greater danger for someone riding in the bike lane as opposed to somebody riding at a slightly faster speed possibly. And then that could also lead to a case where, because someone doesn't feel safe in the bike lane or safe sharing the space with the car, they're maybe more likely to consider doing something like riding on the sidewalk, which can cause that whole other set of problems.
Are your machines capped at 10%? I mean, I know they probably could go faster, but are they sort of capped at 10%? Because I've noticed on the other scooters, I can get them to go faster.
Indeed, and so ours are capped at 10, and we're proud to follow the MOU. But I can't comment for the other vendors, but I understand that, to your point, Jennifer, that we think 10 miles per hour is too slow to the point of being dangerous for the riders. Because if they aren't riding on the sidewalk and they are riding on public roads, 10 miles per hour is not that fast, and you actually don't have the same stability. In most cities, the speed limit is 15 miles per hour. And I've commented to the program administrator here that we are going to continue to follow the MOU so long as it exists. But I do understand that our other vendors are not doing so, which goes back to how your point of enforcement. For me, I'm proud that we are following the rules, but it's obviously not that important to the rest of the people that the city is trusting with its devices. So it's probably something we need to bring up at town hall and city council.
A couple questions about the docks. So the city, and this is for you, Jennifer, the city invested a lot of time and effort and investigation and this long process about where do you put these docks and what's the best place and should it go here and it should go there, and with the Capital Bikeshare. And these things are like solar powered, so you have to put them in a place where it gets lots of sun. And then all of a sudden you got these things popping up and there are no docks. Like, did the city waste all that time and effort creating these docks?
I don't know a lot about the particulars of the DOT program in Alexandria. What the advantage we normally see in terms of transportation innovation with the dockless is that you don't necessarily have to build the docks, and they can kind of spread out to the different parts of the cities that may need them more or less, versus a docked bike share or a docked scooter program where it's stuck in one location, which can certainly solve some problems but create other problems as well. So, for example, if the nearest docked bike share is still half mile away from where I'm trying to go, then I still have a gap, and a half mile might not be far some days, and other days you may really want to ride up to as close as possible to your location.
And I'm wondering about in terms of the app, the stats. What can you learn about the numbers that you're looking at? And is there any way to like incentivize good behavior or bad behavior? You sort of touched on this before, but like, how can you get your users to, how can you as an app incentivize users to do certain things and not do other things?
Yeah, it's, again, primarily based on geofencing, and if someone parks a scooter in an area that we designate, that we recognize as welcome to scooters, and we can provide them financial incentives, like $1 off their current ride or a certain percentage off their next ride. And we have, through our team, we have kind of a communication channel that we essentially flag every time we pick up a scooter that's down, every time it's vandalized, every time it's thrown in a trash can or what have you. And we go ahead and keep a log of the last person that rode that scooter. If we reach out to them in some cases, and if there's multiple cases of careless use, we go ahead and suspend that person's account so they don't have access to our app once they've demonstrated enough times that they can be trusted.
You touched on something that we've seen a growing amount of, which is vandalism of these things. So there's so much anger at these things that you see people smearing them with feces, or putting dog poop on them, or throwing them in a garbage can, or throwing them in the river. I mean, Hal, you've seen some of this stuff, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and I've seen pictures of them in the river, and I understand in Venice Beach, California, they throw them in the ocean. And I tell people, I have to, as on the board of the Environmental Council of Alexandria, don't throw them in the river, because the lithium will leak out, and the arsenic in the circuit boards, and it'll pollute the Potomac, and that's what we're trying to fight. So yeah, I mean, and what do you do? I mean, I've got a question for Will and Jennifer. I'm walking down the sidewalk, and sometimes two of them are completely blocking the sidewalk. It's a pedestrian thoroughfare. Whether they're laying down or standing up, I view them as abandoned property. What does the law say on that? So something's blocking a public thoroughfare, and it's abandoned, even though it may have your name on it. What's the rules on that?
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure what the rules are, but we'd be happy to pick it up. So, not that I'm deferring responsibility to you or any of you, but certainly if it's a nuisance and we can give help, we certainly want to be. So Chris and his team are here in large part to place things that back into the spots where they're not out of place. So it's that's our team's job and responsibility. So hate to burden anyone with an additional email or a phone call. But if you are encouraged to get a hold of us, we'll certainly do our part to make sure that we can right that work.
Michael, could I say something real quick? And I wanted to talk to Will at the table. We didn't have a long time to talk. Will and Jennifer and I sat at the same table. And he didn't squeeze my palm under the table to say this, but Bolt, the yellow scooters, right? And they have the biggest handlebar stem. And they have the rules written on it, like helmets and 18 plus, I think, and put them in corrals. And they seem to be the most robust. I can't wait to see the new ones that come out. But when I saw corrals after, literally tripped on one in the early morning when I go to Starbucks at 5:30 because I was texting, which I shouldn't have been walking. But I said, corrals, where are the corrals? I mean, is that the rules? Is it your rules? Is it city rules? Before we adopted a pilot program, why weren't corrals established? And I still don't know. We've talked about that. I won't belabor the point.
Well, I want to be careful about how we use the word corral, because I think in the discussion about the policy discussion is, should the city create corrals where you're supposed to park these things? Right now, that doesn't exist, and you can park them anywhere. I think what you're talking about is when these independent contractors who power these things in the morning set them up like that's what you're talking about when you say corral, right? I mean, that's not.
No, I'm talking about a city designated place, and I think me, it's their responsibility on the part of the city. And it says they're the only scooters that have these instructions on them for what they're worth. Thanks. And he didn't pay me to do this. But what is a corral? So you go up and rent a scooter, and it says corral. Okay, where's the corral? How come that hasn't been advertised? I expect to see some horses down here.
So in Arlington, they've started to do the corrals in some areas. I know Ballston has them and Roslyn has them, and what they usually are is they're a parking place that has been painted a certain color, but then it's up on...
You just lost half our audience.
But then it's up to... And again, I can certainly understand that parking is an issue in Old Town as well and in a lot of these areas, but what they'll do is they'll take one parking place that can then park, say, 12 scooters. I know you're losing one parking place, but the idea is that you're moving them off the road and off the sidewalk, but you then have to inform people, and this is why education is so important with any new technology. And it's easy to forget that at one time, everything we consider common today, whether it's cars or bicycles, and I'm not talking about just bike shares, I'm talking about at the turn of the century when there were cities that wanted to, say, ban bicycles from Central Park in New York. And so these reactions.
Wait, actually, can I get you to explain that? So at one point, bicycles were not allowed in Central Park?
There was a movement afoot about banning bicycles at the turn of the century in different cities, much similar to some of the conversations we have about scooters today.
And so what happened with all that?
Well, gradually we saw different norms develop, and we were able to work through some of these problems, and we learned different ways to share space and that to solve a lot of the concerns, and that sometimes transportation innovation solves problems and has a lot of benefits along the way. And then in some cases, we did need regulations about where you can and can't ride them and suggesting behaviors. And we've even seen this with, I know you brought up helmets earlier, with bicycles and helmets in most cases, helmets are not legally mandated on bicycles, but I know that my mother always insisted when I rode my bike that I have my helmet on me, and so it's kind of been an enforced behavior, and over time we've learned why it's dangerous to ride a bicycle without a helmet. So if you choose not to ride one with a helmet, you're aware of kind of the danger at play.
Let's hear it from others, right? So just after Mother's Day. So you just mentioned geofencing. Question from the audience. Rather than docking stations, why not geofence convenient locations? This is kind of what you're talking about. How do they do that in Arlington? So like if you are riding it from, one of the places I visit a lot in Arlington is the library. This will not surprise you. So if I'm going from like the metro station to the library, there might be a place near the library that's a corral. How would I even know where the corral is?
So again, the corrals are largely kind of a community response. They aren't necessarily a strict enforcement, and this is just one of the solutions and one way that some...
Oh, this is more like a social behavior. I recognize that other people park there.
So there are a couple of things. So the corrals themselves, usually what we're referring to as a dockless corral, is something that has been designated in some ways, whether it's by the city or by a local community, smaller than a city, like a homeowners association. So for example, in Roslyn, when they just started, when there were these big kind of the orange traffic signs that light up and tell you when road construction's coming or when things are going to be closed down for a 5K, saying look for scooter corrals, look for dockless corrals, things like that.
We've seen these actually pop up just recently here in Alexandria with the signs that say scooters use the road, don't use the sidewalks.
Right. And that's part of the way that cities and local areas can educate people about practicing good behavior. In other cases, though, we've seen people or places like the library or like GMU's Arlington campus where they put up signs saying, please park scooters near the bike rack. So I think that's more the situation where you're talking about. And then in other cases, they don't need a sign in that people gradually learn a good place to leave them, and these norms just kind of organically evolve over time.
So, Will, question about your usage, and we probably should wrap up. I've been told we need to wrap up sometime soon. But I'm curious about any sort of data you have on your users, with two questions regarding the age. What is the age, the average age of the users? What kind of data do you have on that? And another question about, I saw an individual who appeared to look at least 85 years old, but in good shape. Is there an age limit? So I doubt there's an age limit, but what kind of data do you have on the age of people using these things?
So you have to be 18 years of age, at least we try and enforce that. But we don't have an age cap. And I'd say that the average, we've done some formal surveys and some informal ones. We'd say that the sweet spot or the common demographic, it skews slightly male, not by much though. It's 56% of the respondents to our surveys. And it's between the ages of 28 and 36, which I know is a large range, but we do build our scooters, these and the new ones coming out, with that platform, with higher handlebars, with bright front and rear lights, in an attempt to attract people of all ages, sizes, athletic aptitudes to our scooters. I'm not sure if the same can be said of some of the others, but it's certainly an interest of ours that we can provide mobility for all that need it.
All right, so I'm going to go once around as sort of a final round. Hal, I'm going to start with you and ask you, what should the city do? So you've got the city, I see some elected officials here have joined us in the room. What do you want them to do? Like, what would you like to see them do to solve some of these things that we've been talking about?
Well, some would say on the extreme side, let's terminate the pilot program
What would you say?
immediately.
Would you say that?
Almost. Let me, be evasive on that. I had my cousins came up from Richmond to my birthday party this weekend to Alexandria. They stayed in the Crown Royal. They're 76 and 77, but they're pretty mobile. And the hotel messed up the bill. I was going to pay for the rooms, and they got, and so they called me today to tell me that, so I could go straighten it out tomorrow, and I pay for it. But the first thing I heard is scooters need to go away immediately. Now, I told them I was coming tonight, but the challenges they had just from Friday afternoon till Sunday afternoon with scooters. So I think the city did not do the due diligence when it approved the program. The enforcement, the rules that I've told by a city employee. Well, we've got an MOU with the regulations. And I said, an MOU, I worked in government 40 years, means nothing. It's not the law. And it just wasn't thought out. And I don't say it should go away tomorrow, but I think they should go back to the drawing board if they want to do this and do it properly. And something I didn't mention earlier, different subject, you talked about corrals and being placed on the sidewalks. I did notice about a month ago, rather than have them all over the place, apparently when your people put them out, they'll put 3 to 5 of them not in the sidewalk, but like I park my bicycle between the lamp post and the curb, I mean, that's just common sense and personal courtesy, which a lot of the scooter riders don't seem to have, and these thoughts are coming out. I could talk all night. Will, your demographic, 28 to 36, somebody said earlier at least half of them are underage, and I can, from my observations, I can practically guarantee you that. And on personal responsibility, a final word, full disclosure, I've been riding a bicycle 65 years, and I've never worn a helmet, and if I have a concussion or die, that's my problem, and that's personal responsibility, but I don't see a lot of that exercised out there.
Jennifer, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, which is, look into your crystal ball, and 10 years into the future, where is all of this headed? Like right now, there's a lot of sort of unknowns about how any of this works now or how it's going to shape up. And you mentioned right at the beginning, the next vanguard of this, which is dockless mopeds, right? Where is all this headed?
So I think that's the great question, and a lot of it's going to depend on what signal are we sending innovators and entrepreneurs who want to think outside the box, who want to provide solutions to our transportation problems, and how are cities going to respond, and are they going to consider these issues, and are we also going to remember common sense and common courtesy? I like that phrase. I'm gonna steal it, but it's so important. So both are the regulations that we do impose actually addressing the concerns at hand, and also are we providing appropriate education as new forms of transportation come through so that we can truly receive the benefits that make our transportation safer, more efficient, and more enjoyable.
And Will, final question for you, also slightly different, which is, you got right now, there are all these companies, 6 of them in Alexandria, they're all vying to be the market leader, right? So I know that you, of course, want to be the market leader, but the company that eventually prevails and wins the Game of Thrones, like, how do they do that?
I didn't watch last night, so.
I didn't either.
So I'll answer this question, and part of the one that was thrown in the house. You should hold the vendors to high standards. I think that there is practical value for a lot of different people in this city and others with these types of dockless devices. But don't allow us to roam without regulation. And I think that you should hold us to high standards, and you should take a look at the data, because there is lots of it to analyze. And I think that the operators that can demonstrate that they are acting in good faith with common courtesy, and that can complement the transportation ecosystem in any given city, should have the opportunity to continue to operate. But if that changes, the city should be swift to change as well.
All right, and the City Council will be looking at all of those things this fall when they sort of take stock of the pilot program and how it works. So that has been our program on scooters. I thank you all very much for coming out tonight. One more thing. So normally at this point, I would give a commercial for our next agenda, Alexandria, but we're not meeting, of course, until September, and we don't know what we'll be talking about in September, which is why we want your thoughts on the ballot. So if you want to type out your thoughts in terms of the programs you'd like to see, you can also send an email to executivedirector@agendaalexandria.com. And I want to thank our panelists and thank you all very much for coming this evening. Have a wonderful summer.